How's everybody doing today?
Okay.
Afternoon.
Well, thank you.
Summertime is
Great.
here. It's a good summer here in Los Angeles, except if you're a Laker.
Want to start with a joke?
Yeah, go ahead.
Person's interviewing for a job, and the interviewer says, "Sir, you look like you have impressive skills, but there's a 4-year gap in your resume. What'd you do?" And he said, "I went to Yale." He said, "Very, very impressive. You should probably add that. It looks like, we're ready to make a hire." He said, "Good, because I really need this job."
That's an old joke, Douglas. That's an old joke.
It's cute, though. My partner was saying that is prejudice against Hispanics. And then I said, JEPD, German. They don't use the J as a Y, too.
All right. Be careful. I don't want you to get in trouble. That's the main thing.
It's German. It is German. The
Yeah,
J.
I know. You're right. You're right. I'm just okay. Before we get started, we jump into the Bible a minute. Any questions, comments, counter sermons, issues from last week?
I asked you a question and you said to deal with it at the Lunch and Learn. Is this
But
the
what
time?
was the question? So remind us.
Wearing the kippah in public.
Yeah. What's the problem? The
We're
question.
what's the question?
Should
Well,
you or is it dangerous? What's the question about?
my wife we're having a quote discussion about that. She
Uh-huh.
thinks I'm an idiot to want to wear a kippah in public.
Because she's afraid you're going to get your head chopped off, or because
Pretty
it
much.
identifies you, or because
Pretty much. That's what she thinks.
yeah, look. So there is. I'm about to do a program this afternoon with Deborah Lipstadt about anti-Semitism in America. So there is a sort of radical rise in anti-Semitic events and instances, and there's some crazies running around hurting people. So there is a certain degree of personal danger. And the second question is, what does it mean, and what is it important to do? Okay, so is it important to identify and let people know that Jews, we live among the rest of the populace, we do business, we enjoy entertainment, we share the community with one another, but this is our religious expression, same way that religious folks, Christian folks will wear a cross, a Muslim woman will wear a hijab. Is that an important statement to make? It might be an important statement to make at this point in our history. So there's a certain degree of justification in thinking that way. And then the other question is, what does it do for you? What does it say to you in terms of your identification and your reminder that you live under heaven and you're not the be all and end all of the universe? And that's the reason one wears a kippah is to carry on that sense of being reminded that one is part of a people, one is part of a covenant, one is part of God's world, and one has responsibilities in that direction. So I think it's a lovely gesture. I would be careful. I've taken to wearing my baseball cap over my kippah. So the worst that can do is people can get mad at me for rooting for the Dodgers,
I'm a Yankee fan, so that's dangerous too.
Yeah, Yankees, I said, San Francisco Giants will get you killed in LA, but I think that's a legitimate expression of who we are. And, just be careful. That's the only thing. I think that's part of what your wife is worried about, because there is a lot of what's going on is not a surprise for people of our generation who really hoped and assumed that this would be finished by now, that anti-Semitism would go the way of other ancient and strange superstitions and prejudices. Unfortunately, it hasn't. And we see there's an upturn in anti-Semitic events. So just be very careful. Okay?
Okay.
Good. Other interesting questions. That was good, Douglas. Thank you. Other interesting questions, comments this morning before we get started? Okay, I think I have silenced the crowd. Congratulations. Well, today's the last day of school at VBS, so the kids are finished. Camp starts like the day after tomorrow, but camp starts next week. But it's been a really interesting year in school, as you can imagine. I think it's the most difficult year in the history of the American educational system for all of our kids. So we want to congratulate the teachers and parents for their courage and tenacity in helping education actually happen this year for our children, and wish them all. I hope it's a better school year next year, as we'll start in person and we'll start together. So we've been talking about the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth is one of the short books at the end of the Hebrew Bible, one of the 5 Megillot, one of the 5 liturgical books that are read during the Jewish holidays. Ruth happens to be read during Shavuot, as you can see, first of all, because it takes place during the harvest season. And you'll see why as we get into the source of the book. And we've been doing chapter by chapter. And this afternoon, we're going to do the chapter which is X-rated or R-rated. So if you're under the age of 18, this would be a good time to step out of the room, because this is going to be an unabashed interpretation of the book of Ruth. So in the book of Ruth, we're introduced to a family. The patriarch of the family is Elimelech. Elimelech uproots his family and moves from the promised land out to Moab, which is a neighboring kingdom. And in order to survive a famine, a drought. And while he's there, he dies, and his 2 sons die, which leaves his wife Naomi with 2 daughters-in-law who are Moabite women. One of them, Orpah, goes back to her family, but Ruth accompanies Naomi back to the land of Israel. And we have this tremendous sense of connection, a tremendous bond between these 2 women. And Ruth, who is a woman whose loyalty is her badge. Loyalty is what she is, her character. She is chesed in the Jewish tradition, which is loyalty and love. Ruth comes back to Judea with Naomi and goes and provides for her mother-in-law by gleaning in the fields. And she happens to find herself in the field of their relative Boaz. And Boaz says to her, I'm not interested in where you come from. I'm not interested in your ethnic background. I'm not interested in, we would say, in your genetics. It's not a word that he would understand. I'm interested in your character. And the character is a character that we recognize. It's a reflection of the quality of chesed. Chesed is loyalty. Chesed is kindness. Chesed is tenacity to stick to something, to hold on, and loving care for the people in your life. And he says to her, because of your loving care, we owe you a great deal. Come and be with us. And you have in this, in Boaz, you have a sort of attitude which is precious, a very powerful attitude in which the boundaries between Israel and the rest of the world sort of melt. And instead of having ethnic boundaries or family boundaries or genetic boundaries or any of the other kinds of boundaries, it's simply a moral boundary. If your character is congruent with the character that our covenant teaches, then you are one of us. And if not, then you're one of them, regardless of who birthed you in the world. And that's the argument that this book is going to make. But there's a problem. And the problem is that we are an ethnic people. We are a family. And breaking into a family is never easy. I mean, I don't know how many of you have had the experience of being a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law, but it's an interesting designation, right? I'm part of this family because I married their child, and they'll treat me in a certain way, but I'll never fully be a member of that family because I don't share their internal language, because I don't share their memories, because I don't understand the jokes, because my personal habits may be somewhat off. I mean, I grew up in a home where there were no table manners. You know, I grew up with 3 brothers, so it was always a contest for who could get the last piece of chicken. And the only rule in my house was don't stab your brother with a fork, right? Then I move into my wife's family, and they have this quaint custom where everybody eats what's on their plate and nobody reaches and nobody touches anybody else's food, and they actually use napkins, you know? I mean, strange customs, you know, and I had to get used to this because they were kind of, they look, I didn't want to be the barbarian at the table, although that's where I came from. So, you find your way into the family, but you're never fully there. And that's going to be the condition of the person who comes from the outside in all of our transactions. Now there are some opinions in the Jewish tradition, as we saw last week, starting with the book of Ezra, in which there is no such thing as conversion. The only way in is to be born into this people. And then you have on the other side the book of Ruth, which is trying to make a case for opening the boundaries, for making the boundaries permeable. And that's going to be the argument in the Bible. And as we go through Jewish history, you hear the same argument goes through even to this day, the same argument. I'll give you one of the radical expressions of this argument. One of the radical expressions comes from the book called the Tanya. The Tanya is the source book of Chabad Hasidism. And in the Tanya, the Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zal, says basically that the souls of non-Jews are of a much lower quality than the souls of Jews, much closer to the animal than to the angelic. There's a hierarchy of souls, and Jewish souls are much better quality, and non-Jews, which is why Chabad rabbis typically don't do conversions, because Chabad in some ways doesn't believe in conversion. Now, some of the guys have departed from that, changed their ways, stories about this, but the basic attitude is this sort of metaphysic of Jewish particularism, Jewish separation, and not a mixing as you would have in other expressions of Jewish life. The opposite of that is Maimonides, who for whom Judaism is not a family thing at all. Judaism is a creed. It's a set of beliefs. And if you take on that set of beliefs and the morality that goes with it, you are a Jew no matter what you come from. There's no biology involved in this at all. And this becomes a conflict within the heart of Judaism, the nature of the boundaries that separate us from them, the nature of the boundaries, and whether we welcome people in. And this is a long standing debate. The book of Ruth sets out, I think, the most powerful case, as does Maimonides, for welcoming the outsider. And that's what we're about to see, but it's not easy. It's not easy to enter into our circle, and that's what we're about to see as well. So let's take a look now at the third chapter. You ready? The third chapter. So just to bring you up to date, Ruth comes back from the field of Boaz laden with a ton of grain, and she shows her mother-in-law how much food she found. And the mother-in-law said, "Tell me the name of the man you were working with." And she says, "The name of the man with whom I'm working today is Boaz." And Naomi says, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not failed in his kindness to the living or the dead. For the man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen." All right, let's stop a second and understand the nature of that phrase, okay? In Jewish law, there are two laws that protect the family line and the property. The first is the family line. And the family line is that if a man dies childless, his widow is married to his next closest relative. And the next closest relative then cohabits with the woman, and they have a child, and the child is named for the dead husband. So if Ruth were to have a child with that next closest relative, he would be whatever his name is going to be. It's going to be Lebron, son of Machalon, not son of the biological father, but son of the dead first husband. He's Ben Machalon. Okay, so and the person who comes to marry is called a Yivum, but he's also called a redeeming kinsman. Okay, the second reference to this is property law. Every family was given a piece of property in the land of Israel. Now, you could sell your property. So the Workman family got their estate, and the Schroeder family got their estate, and the Katz and Feinstein family, we got our estates. If Andy wanted to sell his family estate, before he's allowed to put it on the open market, he has to offer it to his relatives, and they go in order. And the closest relative is called a goel, which means a redeemer, a rescuer, a savior, because what he's doing is buying the property and keeping it in the family. He's not letting some stranger come and live on the family property. So we have two laws having to do with preserving family integrity. One preserves the family name and one preserves the family estate. And they both have to do with the closest relative. okay? And the closest relative is called a goel. And the word goel in vernacular means someone who rescues you. And in this technical sense, it's the person who is allowed to buy your property first. Everybody get that? So when Naomi says to Ruth, Boaz is our goel, she's saying it in both senses. He is, on the one hand, somebody who's rescued us. Look how much food he just gave us. And in another sense, he is one of the closest to us who would have a right to buy our property and who would be obligated to keep the husband's name alive in the world. Ruth the Moabite said, he even told me, stay close to my workers. And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law, Ruth, it's best, daughter, that you go out with his girls and not be annoyed in some other field. So he'll protect you. You're a vulnerable woman. He'll protect you. So she stayed close to the maidservants of Boaz and gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. And she stayed home with her mother-in-law. Now, when a person is grieving, they live only in the present tense. They may visit the past, but they never think of the future. Which is why if you go to a shiva and you say to the person who's grieving, would you like to have lunch with me a week from Tuesday? They often are confused and can't quite answer you. Because one of the things that happens when we're grief-stricken is that our time sense gets very narrow. So when a person begins to think about what am I going to do tomorrow, that's the beginning of healing. Naomi has been grief-stricken. She has been struck down by the worst grief. She's lost 2 sons and a husband. And now she's living back in her land and she sees where everybody else is and what everyone else has. And she realizes just how lonely she is. But suddenly the name Boaz opens up something inside of her. The name Boaz, who is her husband's relative and one of the closest ones, opens up something inside of her. Plus, I think it's the presence of Ruth that opens up something inside of her. And chapter 3 opens with this speech. Naomi, her mother-in-law, so they keep telling you what the relationship is, so that you understand how close they are, said to her, daughter, I must seek a home for you. That's a beautiful phrase, because your mother-in-law, once the husband dies, you're really not related to this woman anymore. But for Naomi, Ruth is a daughter-in-law. I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do. And she replied, I will do everything you told me. Now, what is she being told to do? Let's sort of gather this in. Ready? First, a little biblical geography. In the south of Israel, they grow barley. Barley is a grass. The trick to growing barley is you want to wait until it really ripens, which is late into the spring, into the early summer. But once it ripens, it must not get wet, because if it gets wet, it will rot and you will have nothing to eat. So the trick is to wait and wait and wait as the barley grows and ripens and gets bigger. The kernels get bigger and fuller, but to pull it all in as soon as the moment is ripe and get it all threshed and siloed before there is a spring rainstorm that will ruin your crop. So what happens? This is when all the farmers of the field cooperate with each other and they all go out together. And this is a collective effort. Everyone works on everybody else's field. This is a collective effort. And they pick the day and they all go out together and they cut, and they schlep, and they thresh, and then they silo all of the barley. So the men will go out and will sleep in the fields. They don't come in the morning. They don't come in at night because they want to be there just at the crack of dawn. As soon as it's light enough to wield a scythe, they want to be there just at the crack of dawn to be able to cut all that barley and bring it in and get it in the silo before the rain comes. And when the men have spent so many days out living in the field, and cutting the barley and schlepping the barley and threshing the barley, well, then they're done and there's a celebration. What do you make out of barley? Say what?
Beer.
Yes, it's Miller time, as it were, right? Beer. And ancient peoples knew how to make very good, strong beer. I don't know if it's good because I never drank any of it, but we know that it was very strong beer. And once the men have finished all of this work, cutting and schlepping and threshing, the threshing floor is cleared out. Threshing floor is this big barn with a sort of mill in the middle of it, and the threshing floor becomes a place for the men to tie one on, and to have one good, it's Miller time. You have a good drinking fest. And then what men love to do after they've had a night of heavy drinking is find a nice sack of barley that you can lie yourself down on and fall into a beautiful sleep. And it's a machaya, right? All right. So what is she being told to do? She's being told to bathe, which is only for special occasions, dress up, anoint yourself, make yourself farpuched, and smelling good. Go down to the threshing floor. I always think there should be a B.B. King soundtrack for this, da 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 dump, right? Go down to the threshing floor and go lie with the man. Now, think about what she's being told. This is astonishing and terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. The threshing floor on the night that they finish the threshing, when the men have been drinking, is the ultimate men's place. It's where all the men who have been out in the field all this time, separated from their wives, are. It's all the men have been in this heavy physical labor. It's all the men have been drinking heavily. It's the men's place. And she is being sent into the men's place. Now, who is she? She is the personification of vulnerability. The Bible has 3 words for vulnerable people: stranger, widow, orphan. She's all 3. She is the stranger because she's the Moabite. She's a widow. And inasmuch as she separated herself from her parents, she's an orphan. She has no one to look after her. And on top of that, she's a woman. And she's a woman, I don't know if there's a graceful way to say this, so I'll say that she's a woman of sexual age, put it that way. She's a woman, she's a young woman, she's an attractive woman, right? And she's dressing herself up to be seductive. Hang on just a second. Apparently there's a problem with the feed. Yes. Okay, let me try this again. We're having a problem with I'm told it's live streaming. Okay. Sorry. She is a woman who is, and she's being told to do what? Go down to this place where there is just the men. Go down and expose yourself to the danger. Make yourself available to this man sexually, right? Give him yourself, basically. And Naomi is counting on the fact that Boaz is a mensch, that Boaz is not going to use her and toss her out. She's going to test Boaz's menschlichkeit, test his ethics, basically, right? And she's going to test to see because he could very well just use her and toss her out, and there's nothing she could do about it. First of all, she shouldn't have been there to begin with, and why was she trying to seduce him? And she has no standing as a stranger, a widow, and an orphan, and no one to watch out for her. She's completely vulnerable. And she's also, in a certain sense, the terrifying nature of this is she has only one power left in the world, which is the power of her sexuality. There's a line in the book of Deuteronomy, which I quote often. It talks about it talks about this rule of the gleaning, by the way, that when you have a field, You don't glean to the edge of the field. You don't harvest to the edge of the field, and you don't glean the field. You don't, anything that's not ripe on the first pass through the field by the harvesters goes to the strangers, the widows, and the orphans. And then in part of that law, I can find you the rule, it's chapter 24. It says, you will not take a widow's garment in pawn. Right? Now think about that a minute. A widow's garment, you take the shirt off her back. You're not permitted to allow a person to lower themselves to that level in order to support herself. You're not permitted to force a woman to sell herself, to sell her dignity, to sell her body, to sell her sexuality in order to support herself. That's not permitted in Jewish law. You're not that prostitution is a crime, but that the society should not allow any human being to fall to that level of indignity and humiliation. That's what's being argued here. And this is exactly what Ruth is doing. She's putting herself in that position. So let's see what happens, because I'm dying to know what happens. Ready? Everybody ready? So she did it, right? She went down to the threshing floor. She dressed and she prepared herself, and she went down to the threshing floor. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood, he went to lie down beside the grain pile. She went over stealthily and uncovered his feet. That's clearly a euphemism. All right, this is not Adventures in Podiatry, I assure you, right? She's not giving him a foot massage. Okay, it's just the Bible's more gentle way of saying she uncovered him, right? So what happened? Hang on just 1 second. Hang on one second. I want to see if I can get this thing to come on. We're having a problem with the okay. So there it is. Okay. So she goes down. She does everything that he's told that she's told to do. Boaz ate and drank. In a cheerful mood, he went to lie down beside the grain pile. She went over, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at his feet. So Boaz is drunk, and he wakes up in the middle of the night, as men will do, especially us middle-aged guys, having had something, a lot to drink, right? And he wakes up and he sees this woman, and she's this beautiful young woman, and she's lying, caressing his feet, right? So now, what does he think? What's his first thought? What's his first thought? Come on, I need your help here. What's his
I went to heaven. I don't know.
Yes, I'm dreaming. Don't wake me up, right? Whatever the dream is, don't wake me up. Leave me, right? Yeah, I mean, his first thought is he's not sure this is really happening, or this isn't just a fantasy or an illusion, right? But the second thought is, oh my God, this is lovely. I mean, this is remarkable, right? And my assumption here, and we can argue this. My assumption is he's Elimelech's kinsman. So he is an older man. He's as old as Elimelech was. Elimelech is her father-in-law. So he's an older guy in that society, a man in his middle age, late middle age, right? And he's probably a widower, because a lot of women died in childbirth. And it doesn't mention that he has any other family. So here's a guy who was married and had a wife and may have had kids and is now a wealthy widower, and he hasn't been in an intimate way in a very long time. And he wakes up in the middle of the night, and my God, there's this beautiful young woman who is, yeah. So here we go. And his first thought is, my God. And so it looks at him, then David, if you're filming this, this is your sort of point of view through the camera lens. You see what he sees. What do you call that in movies, when you see what the character sees?
The point of view.
Yeah. There's a woman. I mean, so that's the image, right? You see this woman there, and he asks her, "Who are you?" Now, I've told you many times, if you want to understand the Bible, look for the questions. Whenever there is a question in the Bible, that's what the narrative is all about. In some sense, the narrative is simply dressing for the question, right? When God says in the first chapters of Genesis, Ayeka, where are you? Or Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? Right? Or Abraham says, shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? The questions capture the narrative. So the whole narrative of this book is, who are you? And what makes you who you are? Is it where you came from, the people you came from, the culture you came from, or the character that is endemic to your soul? That's the great question of the narrative. Who are you? Who are you is the question. And he says to her, who are you? And she replies, and I didn't make this up. The word is shivcha, but the translation is is not so great. It's, I am your handmaid, no kidding, Ruth, right? And then she says to him, spread your robe over me, over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman. So now that's such a beautiful phrase, right? Spread your robe over me. In Jewish custom, to put a robe over somebody is a betrothal. If you see at the end of weddings, Sephardic weddings, but I start doing this too because it's too beautiful. We wrap the couple in a big talit, in a big tzitzit, and that's a symbol of betrothal. That's a symbol of being bonded together. And she says that you wrap your robe around. Remember what he had said to her before? May you find refuge under the wings of God's presence. So now she says, put your robe over me. That's the parallel phrase. And then she says, you are my goel. You are my rescuer. Now, technically, legally, she's right. He is one of the closest relatives. But here she means it in both senses. You are legally my goel. You are legally the one who would purchase the property and protect the family. But you are more than that. You are the person I depend upon to help you. You are my goel. And so he says to her, be blessed of the Lord, daughter, your latest deed of loyalty is greater than your first. You haven't turned to younger men, rich or poor. I'll come back to that. He said, have no fear. I will do what you ask, for all the elders of the town know what a fine woman you are. But while it's true that I am a redeeming kinsman, there's another guy who's closer than me, who has a prior claim than I do. Stay the night. In the morning, he will act as redeemer good. If not, I will act as redeemer for you. I will do this as God lives. Stay the night. Lie down until morning. Now, the first thing I want to point out to you is, if this were a good Protestant text, if this were Billy Graham's Torah, he would never have said to her, stay the night. He would have said to her, honey, this is bad for your reputation. You know, it's wake up little Susie. Remember, wake up little Susie? It's 4 a.m. and our reputation's shot. Go home before anybody sees. You shouldn't be here. We need to be properly married before anything happens. That's good Protestant Torah. This isn't good Protestant Torah. This is good Jewish Torah. First of all, he's a middle-aged guy. It's been a long time. Suddenly he wakes up. There's a girl there. Things are happening which he could not have imagined were going to happen. So his response, and he says it twice, is stay the night. Stay. And that's, I mean, it's a clear sexual reference, but the idea of being, yeah, stay the night. I mean, don't let this end. This is too good. You know, it's remarkable, right? Now, there's a serious problem with this too, by the way, because if the other guy is really the redeemer and she becomes pregnant with Boaz, interesting problem of paternity here. But in any case, stay the night, he says twice. I just think that it's such a realistic and such a precious Torah. It's a precious idea. You know, it's a stay the night. I mean, she's a widow, he's a widower. It's not that they're kids, but stay the night. That's the first thing. And then he says, you know, there's this other guy. We got to take care of him. We'll take care of that. I promise you. Stay the night. But it's the other line, which is amazing. It's just, and it's so innocuous and it's so obscure. So we have to really take a look at this line. Look at this line again. He says to her, be blessed of the Lord, daughter, which is beautiful. You are a blessing. Now listen to the next sentence. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than your first. Now, what is he talking about? What was her first deed of loyalty? What was the first deed of loyalty?
He came back with Ruth,
He came back with Naomi.
with Naomi.
Your first law is that you came back with Naomi. You protected your mother-in-law. You protected your mother-in-law. That's your first deed of loyalty. And remember, Boaz is a man who is all about loyalty. Boaz, there is strength in him because he is rooted. He is rooted in the land. When the drought came, Elimelech left, Boaz stayed. When the drought came, Elimelech left behind the community, Boaz stayed in the community. Boaz kept his workers on his payroll. He paid them despite the fact that he had no income. He is a man of loyalty and he respects loyalty. That is his highest value. And he sees that in Ruth. That's your greatest deed of your first deed of loyalty. But what is your latest deed of loyalty? What is he talking about there? Could be all sorts of things you're protecting. You're protecting your mother-in-law, but that's not what it is. Look at the next line. In that you have not turned to younger men, rich or poor. You haven't turned to younger men, rich or poor. That's the latest deed of loyalty, which is greater than the first. What is he talking about? Well, here's Boaz. Boaz is an older guy. He's been widowed for a long time. No woman was interested in marrying him. And she comes to him and is with him. She stays with him. She sleeps with him. And things happen. He is awakened in a way which he couldn't have imagined he would be awakened. He's awakened as a man. He's awakened as a lover. He's awakened as a protector. She has awakened things in him, stirred things in him, which he couldn't have imagined. In a certain sense, he was dead before, and now he's been resurrected, or at least somnolent, and now he's been awakened. She has brought things back to life inside of him, which he couldn't have imagined. You could have gone to younger men, but you came to me, and look what you've done for me. And in as much as you've done that for me, that's your greatest deed of loyalty, even greater than what you did before. Now, what's being said here? It's a really interesting text. First of all, that the woman has to go down to the woman has to go into this men's domain, which is so risky. Represents the one who wants to come from the outside in. We Jews make it very hard for someone to come from the outside in. That's what the book of Ruth is telling us. Look what we make people do. Look at how uncomfortable it is, how difficult it is, how scary it is. Look at the vulnerability that we exploit in that moment. And then what really happens is, for the one who has the courage to really do it, what's the benefit? She awakens things in us that we didn't know we had. She awakens life in us that we didn't know we had. She awakens possibilities in us that we didn't know we had. The outsider brings us back to life in ways that we didn't know we needed, we didn't know we were capable of. That's what she does for him. And that's why he says your latest deed of loyalty is greater than your first, because it's the deed of loyalty in resurrecting me and giving me back to life, making me a man again, as it were, in ways that I couldn't have imagined would ever happen before. And the metaphor here, I think, is pretty clear, that the outsider who we allow into our circle brings us life, creativity, if you will, virility, power that we didn't know we had. And that's why it's so terribly important to open up the circle and allow the outsider in. That's what the Bible is trying to tell us here, using this very intimate scene. All right, let's stop a second. Questions, comments, counter sermons. That was heavy. Yes, Ed, please. Mr. Shackman. Yeah.
Yes. You know, this chapter really talks about character, as you've mentioned before.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing how character has been turned on its head recently with what's going on in the United States, where character doesn't matter anymore. Um, what matters, unfortunately, is exactly what the book is trying to teach doesn't matter, such as color, origin of ancestors or yourself, your gender, or, and I'll use the word, the gender to which you aspire.
Yeah.
I mean, everything but character is involved in so many decisions now from what's going on in our society. It is scary,
Yeah.
very scary.
That's a wonderful observation. I think you're right. I mean, I think that this is a book which says, I'm not interested in any of those other things. I just want to know the quality of your ethics, the quality of your soul. And Boaz is a man who is able to see through the screens. He doesn't see her as a Moabite. He doesn't see her as a widow. He doesn't see any of that issues. He sees her as a human being whose loyalty and love are preeminent. And for that reason, he embraces her, both literally and figuratively. Yeah, David, where are you? Hi.
Um, I don't know. Again, I don't know how old the story is. I mean, but why is it that the Bible has this issue about letting the outsider in, and that it's a good thing, and that it makes things better? What's the genesis of that?
Why is the Bible, say that again?
Well, it's a story about letting the outsider in, so far as I understand you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very interested, especially in juxtaposition what you were saying about the issue of conversion in certain areas of Judaism. Letting the outsider in? Why?
That's a good question. I think because in the beginning, when we talk about Abraham, talk about Moses, talking about the early days of the Israelite kingdom, there was no worry about the national identity. I think that as we come to see ourselves as a small people in a very, very big world, especially with the conquest by Babylon, and then the conquest Babylon by Persia, so that's the Esther story, and then when the Greeks arrive, the question of who are we? What makes us who we are? What makes us Jews? What are the boundaries of our community? What are the characteristics of our community that need to be defended and protected rather than compromised away? I think identity becomes an issue. And so our relationships to the outside become an acute issue. I think that's exactly as we're no longer just, a small people surrounded by Canaanite tribes, and we're a very small people surrounded by the great empires of Babylon and Assyria and then Persia and Greece. The identity becomes an issue, and boundaries become an issue. And certainly in modernity, when the boundaries have all melted away and we see each other as hyphenated identities, that becomes even a more acute issue. You want to add something?
My phone is ringing, pardon me, but
No, go ahead.
no, I don't want to, and it's okay. Okay, how I interpreted it is something that was incredibly broad-minded of the time. That's an extraordinary, once again, another extraordinary thing about Judaism. That's how I interpreted it.
This book is extraordinary, but it's, I want to show, we'll do this next time because we haven't finished it. There's a context to this, and I'll show you we saw Ezra last time. But take a look at some of the sources through Jewish history, in which the question is asked by different, this book is the most open-minded. The only thing that matches it is Maimonides. But then you're going to get other expressions, I mean, there's something to saying, I don't know, maybe this is too simple, but I just remember, I was in Hebrew school as a kid, and we were proud of Jewish athletes, and proud of what does it mean to be proud of a Jewish athlete? I mean, so he's Jewish. Is he Jewish? He light Shabbos candles. I mean, ethnic pride. What is ethnic pride? What is ethnic identity? What does ethnic solidarity mean? It's a really interesting question. What does peoplehood mean? And it's a question of what defines us as Jews. Ethnicity, solidarity, these kinds of things, and what makes us who we are. It's an interesting question. It's just a very, very, and you're right, this is the most open-minded and the most, in some ways, progressive, but in some ways it's terribly abstract. It's much easier to root for to love a movie star if they're Jewish, or to love an athlete if they're Jewish because they're Jewish.
Well, it really seems to counter
all of that.
I'm sorry.
You're right. It counters all of that. It says, I'm not interested.
In current times, there's a lot of very sort of insular thinking
Right.
And it's a marvelous lesson that here's something that's, I assume, a very old part of the Bible that's saying, don't be so insular, don't be so exclusive, don't, yet there are parameters, there are limits, but who you accept, and not just anybody behaving in any way, but then you have to be a little bit more broad-minded and open-minded.
Well, the question here is this, and I've challenged groups with this question before. Is Jewish what you do, or is Jewish what you are? Is Jewish what you do, or is Jewish what you are? Right? So, I want my kid to marry a Jew. Really? Would you prefer to have a Jew who doesn't care about or resents the fact that they're Jewish, or a non-Jew who is excited to be part of a Pesach Seder, who is delighted to join your Shabbos table, who is concerned deeply about the fate and destiny of the state of Israel? Is Jewish what you do, or Jewish what you are? It's a really interesting question, very controversial question these days. Thank you. Really good stuff. Okay, let's go to Stanley and then Bert.
I was going to say that in Israel today, in terms of ethnicity, it's the most diverse Jewish, let's say, peoplehood that there's ever been in history. Since the coming of all the different factions and ethnicities into Israel to make up Israeli citizenship, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very dynamic, very, fluid. You have couples that are made up of, Yemenite boy and Romanian girl. I mean, it's interesting. If you saw The Baker and the Beauty, you have a sense of what that's all about, right? Okay, Bert, you're up.
Two things quickly. Question of, do you love athletes? I think part of my answer to that is an answer to the broader community, that we too have qualities other than the rumored qualities of being selfish or money lenders or things like that. There are more Jewish Nobel Prize winners, so we must be intelligent, etc. So I think that's part of the reasons that we take pride in accomplishments of people who are Jewish.
Yeah. Well, also because you're put down so much,
Well, yeah.
you're all of the terrible things they say about us. It's so nice to be able to say, yeah, what about Einstein?
Well, exactly. And
what about Sandy Koufax?
The fact that he was a womanizer because he was a
no. That's relative.
well, we're real people. We have all of those qualities.
He believed in relativity. Come on, he was only relative.
There you go.
Go ahead. What was your other question?
I'm sorry, I forgot. I forgot the other point.
All right, we're going to finish the book next time, guys. And we'll take a look at some of the later sources on how Jews thought about outsiders and this process of conversion, of bringing the outsider in. So we'll do a little study of that next time. Have a really good week, everyone. Stay well. Take care. Thanks for being with me.